Well, welcome everyone to our session about the Innovation Scholars Program. My name is John Bonnell, and I am currently director of the Borlaug Higher Education Agricultural and Research Development Program, as well as one of the co-designers and co-directors of the Innovation Scholars Program. Patrick, we can go on to the next slide. USAID's education links and the Higher Education Leadership, Innovation, and Exchange Program, also known as the HELIX program, has identified the Innovation Scholars Program as an innovative model for higher education institutional capacity development. Separate USAID functions and mechanisms has funded the ISP program at 3 universities across 2 countries. And we are excited today to tell you the story of the Innovation Scholars Program that spans back to 2016. My colleagues and I are excited to tell you about this story that spans 6 years and over 40 faculty and institutional leaders from 4 universities on 3 countries, dozens of innovations, and over 100 members on design teams that include faculty, students, and experts from outside of the university, agro-processors and farmers, businesswomen, and ministers of education. The ISP is a unique experiential professional development program that empowers faculty and university leaders to produce a culture of innovation, of stakeholder responsive, innovative research and teaching that drives social and economic development. Threaded throughout the program is training, coaching, mentorship, adapted to context, people-centered on the academics who are actually in the program, evidence-based and pulling on a number of theories of experiential and adult education, and ultimately leading to transformed visioning. And that's really what we're focusing on today. We can go to the next slide, please. I'm joined by my colleagues, also the storytellers of today. First and foremost, today's session will feature presentations, the story of the Innovation Scholars Program from the perspectives of the institutions that co-created and hosted it with us at Michigan State University. So we really want to flip the presentation of evidence and findings in order to embed it in the very perspectives of those who joined with us on this journey. We want you all to hear and be able to engage with the perspectives of the institution so you can hear why and how the Innovation Scholars Programs are still making a difference in these institutions. We'll do some formal introductions later, but it's important now at this point just so you to know who your storytellers will be. First up will be Professor Emmanuel Kaunda, Vice Chancellor of Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, where the Innovation Scholars Program story began in 2016. And then the next host university was the Malawi University of Science and Technology. And you'll be hearing from Dr. David Mkwambisi, Associate Professor and also the Director of the Institute of Industrial Research and Innovation. And then the third story will be told by Dr. Jackie Bonabana, Associate Professor in the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences at Makerere University, where the third cohort of the Innovation Scholars Program is currently underway. After you'll hear these 3 perspectives from these institutions, Dr. Kurt Richter will be sharing more about the model of the program. Kurt is the Associate Professor and Director of the Global Center for Food Systems Innovation. And then I'll follow some things up with more of the components of the program and the model. So we'll close our session today with an interactive Q&A. Can we go to the next slide, please? The ISP trains people to use research and innovation to solve local problems. And so as I mentioned, so today, the brief outline of our presentation will follow the story, history, and the findings from the institutions that hosted the Innovation Scholars Program, 2 from Malawi and 1 in Uganda. And then we'll speak about the delivery of the program and finally close with an interactive panel discussion where we really want to talk about what works and what doesn't work as we partner together in higher education capacity development. We would really like to invite you to listen to these stories from our host institutions, and be listening for how the ISP strengthens individual capacities to use new tools to produce innovation in education, student success, outreach, and research. Be listening for how the ISP strengthens institutional capacity to craft cultures of innovation by training individuals to identify problems and create inclusive solutions. And be listening for how the ISP triggers systems impact by strengthening the relevance of universities, establishing cohorts of innovators, and growing communities of practice. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Emmanuel Kaunda from LUINAR. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, John, and for the good introduction. Just to give a little bit of context, Malawi is a country in Southern Africa, and one typical characteristics of the country is it's reasonably poor. We're talking about per capita income of on about $500 per year. So here you are setting a university, which is an agricultural based. Luana is Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, but where you are expected to be innovative, to provide solutions for this country, which is agrarian. And that's where we're setting why it was very important that we participated in this Innovation Scholar Program. Next slide. Yeah, so this Innovation Scholar Program, we started and we were in partnership with Michigan State University. The first AISP was between 2016 to 2017. And what was key there, and which was very key to us, is the application of human-centered design, where facilitators from Michigan State University and Luana, we co-created this program. And that is, I think, what's been very key, the adaptability of the program to suit the local context. In the creation of this program, we received feedback from the industry, and we came up with 2 tracks. So there was faculty, it means individuals, to change individual mindset, was individuals who make this university. At the same time, we also looked at top management, so to have organizational system changes. So these 2 layers were very key in the configuration of this program. We went through the program, next slide. We went through the program. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, went through the program. As I said, individual, at the same time, the top administration. And what was key for us as top administrator, because it was mainly human-centered and looking at what the institution is actually looking forward to in terms of advancement of this institution. So it helped us, particularly the aspects of human-centered. Number 1 is empathy building. And where you, after doing empathy building, you do ideation up to prototyping, testing of whatever you produce. So that empathy building is a cultural change, which in most of our administrators in our local university is hard to come by. So we were very keen to do that. But what is interesting to us is that that empathy building transformed the whole university leadership, and it became more sustainable, more solving of the problems. It means when students or staff have challenges in terms of innovation, etc., in terms of how to move forward, leadership now is able to come down to solve solutions. Some of you may have experienced, especially those of you who are in here from Africa, we are most of the times suffocated, our universities, by strikes, by sit-ins. And part of the reason is because top management, staff, students, they don't talk to each other. How do we discuss innovation? How do we move forward? So this is one of the key aspects which we felt was very key, that in the end, we ended up with very sustainable university. As I'm talking, in the past in the past 6 months, we have averted 6 sit-in strikes. Now, sit-ins are very bad for investors. It means international reputation goes. it means we can't have intergenerational students. The whole calendar is broken. So the whole change and atmosphere of ISP has actually helped to resolve most of these issues. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Yeah, so if we look at a number of outcomes that came out of this and impacts. Number one, because of individual faculty, faculty transformations, we've ended up introducing an agricultural innovation program at Luana. As I'm talking now, we're in the second, third cohort of the students, which came out of this ISP, out of the experiences of staff, out of the experience of the faculty members. We also, as I mentioned earlier on, the issue of providing insights into SP2 and SP3. So that is very key to us, because after Luana, that's where we went and our staff went and co-created this program at Malawi University of Science and Technology, MAST. And we're still in linkage, and the whole partnership goes on. Like I mentioned earlier on, the top had been the empathy building, community stability of the university, but also critical to us has been through HEGES-The, human centers design. We have now an agribusiness hub and an incubation. Out of this incubation, we have mostly targeted youth, and we have trained so far 300 youth who are starting up their small startups in various areas, which has been a big success to us out of this program. And if you look at this, next slide, please. It has ended up the creation, apart from that, it has ended up the creation of the Center of Excellence in Transforming Agriculture, Commercialization of Entrepreneurship. This has been, it's a World Bank, and through competition, we have set up this center with at least some $5 million US through HCT interface and experiences. Now, if you look at this program, what is it going to be in the future? One, it means continually conduct and commercialize innovative research. And we're also anticipating an improvement of the productivity at commercial scale. We're also expecting that these many cohorts that are coming out of entrepreneurship program, educated young entrepreneurs, they're going to transform the country and actually fitting into the country's vision, which we call Malawi 2063, where we're going to have a transformed agriculture transformation. We're going to also strengthen the human capacity via short-term and long-term training. So the outcomes of ISP at Luana are actually for the whole nation. And that is calling for, which is very key for us. The university has become more relevant. The university is more to be looked to. The university is getting transformative individuals. And that's what's going to transform our agriculture sector, which in the end, we hope is going to include the transformation of our national incomes, because our country is agro-based. So this is very important to us. Next slide. So if you look, what made the ISP program successful? To us, what is key is that when we started ISP 1, the interrelationship of ISP went to ISP 2, went to ISP 3, which my colleagues are going to talk about. And our graduates of ISP 1 act as coaches or are coaches in ISP 2, ISP 3. It means there's been a continuum flow of a program, which is very key for any program. The top administration scholar in ISP 1 were involved in organizing the top administrative track for ISP 3. That means there's been lessons learned interflowing from ISP 3 to ISP 1, from ISP 2 to ISP 1, and vice versa, which I think is an important point for any program. What we have seen, therefore, is in most times when programming is done, it's only 2 years, 3 years. I think we need long-term programming like it has happened here. And of course, part of it is perhaps COVID, etc. But has worked for our good in the way that there's been time where all these organically grow from one level to the other. a lot of learning. And this is why to us think that ISP program has been very, very successful. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Kaunda. We turn it over to Dr. David Mkwambisi. And I would invite all of our participants, feel free to drop in questions or comments in the Zoom chat, and we will discuss these during the closing discussion. Thanks so much. Dr. Mkwambisi.
Thank you, John, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon and good morning. This is David from MAST. And as Professor Kaunda said, Malawi University of Science Technology is currently the youngest university with 8 years old. And the ISP2 started in 2018. And now today I would like to give you the successes and the stories that has happened since then because of the ISP programming. Next slide, please. So before the ISP program funded by USAID, the university was just 4 years old. And while our academic programs have to include innovation and entrepreneurship, the term innovation was not very pronounced in our programming. And the department then was lacking funding, and there was no strategic programming to support the university vision. And there were also a lot of weak linkages between a Center of Excellence and the faculties. In addition, I think most of the faculty members were young, or they were just returning from universities, and they did not know how to bring innovation or to create a university-based innovation ecosystem. So when you see some of those photos there, you see our students were only interested in discussing issues in class, and the lectures were not using innovative mechanisms such as human-centered design. Our labs were empty without equipment to support innovation commercialization. And most of the visitors that were coming to our university were choir groups. These are spiritual groups that they sing because of the beautiful of the building rather than the outcome of the scholarly output. And we didn't engage communities, we didn't engage secondary schools. We were just a university without that type of ecosystem. Next slide, please. So we have a history of our innovation program. When you look down there, in 1993, the government of Malawi established what we call Malawi Industrial Research and Technology Development Center. The whole essence was for this center to support commercialization of innovations, to support smallholder farmers, but also to support innovators. But in 2014, the government transferred this center to MAST. And when they transferred to MAST, the investor was busy expanding the investment because it was quite new and it was not active. When ISP started in 2018, that's when we created the innovation program. And what we did with this innovation program was, one, to make sure that the investors got an innovation ecosystem whereby the leadership, the faculty, the students are all involved and they know where they can drop their innovative ideas. That resulted in the establishment of the Idea Bank. When we established the Idea Bank, we started engaging the faculties. Michigan and Rwanda started capacitating our faculties. And then we extended our program to create what we call Community Innovation Program. This is where we are going to the rural areas to identify innovative ideas and bring them to the university campus where we started supporting the commercialization of their innovations. And that led to the establishment of the Innovation Garage. And this also got funding from Foundation for Smoke-Free World in the US. This garage now, it has grown into a bigger center that is also supporting national agenda. And because of those activities that led to the establishment of the MAST Institute of Industrial Research and Innovation, which is now at the moment leading the pillar number 2 of the Malawi 2063 industrialization, but it has also brought in so many partners to support the innovation ecosystem. One key issue that we want to mention here is that we created a mentorship program, and we have mentors not only from the university, but also from the private sector, from the public. So when you have an innovative idea, we have to identify a mentor. And we have also designed a mentorship program that Michigan is also supporting us. Then shortly this year, actually, we noted that the government of Malawi recognized this institute, and it has been upgraded to be a national center for industrial research and innovation, meaning that it will no longer be a center at the university, but it also start leading the industrialization process at national level. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these were the activities that we designed. We are continuously designing and modifying them. The faculties were involved in human-centered design training, and they were also targeted to solve local needs. Then we created that garage, and most of the partners, they used to support scholarships for students, but now the partners are coming to support the innovations, and we are now commercializing our innovations to create jobs, but also to make sure that the youth are fully engaged. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the heart of our innovation program is centered on students. And from the students, we seriously think is our bigger source of ideas. As you know, Malawi is a youthful nation, and we seriously think we are rich because of the ideas from the students. And when we capture these ideas from the students, we match them with the faculty. These are the faculty people that are well-trained, maybe they got PhDs in different fields. And when we match them with the faculty, we bring in the industry to bring the practical aspect and also to make sure that they are supporting commercialization of these innovations. One key issue is to make sure that the university has gone to the communities. And there we have partnered with several institutions, including TVETA, to make sure that district councils, they identify innovations from the communities and they bring them to the universities, then we commercialize their innovations. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of the interventions that within the SP program we've achieved. So you can actually see one image there is a water dispenser designed by our students and faculty. But now we've also seen a lot of students from MAST winning a lot of innovations, not only in Malawi, but even at global level. The other one there, this is a community innovator who has designed Fidelity Studios. He has never been to any university, but is now part of our scholar. And he is also engaged to teach university students because he's got unique ideas that some of our students, they don't have. And as I indicated now, our university, despite being young, it is now leading the industrialization pillar number 2 of Malawi 2063. And now we are now gonna lead into the development of the policy, and we are now going to support the government of Malawi to establish what we call Technology Innovation Agency. This is the agency that will be developing white papers or policies whereby universities have to contribute to the Malawi agenda. That's the story from Malawi University of Science and Technology. Thank you.
So I'll take you through the story at HEIGES. Thank you, David. Next slide, please. Yes, so up until the recent past, Makerere University has mostly operated as a standalone, know-it-all university and institution of higher learning, churning out students and researchers who have specialized in various fields. The university has been referred to as the ivory tower, basically deciding what fields of study and specializations to be introduced to learners in various curricula, more of a top-down setting. And perhaps because of this, the university has often been accused of being detached from reality. In fact, most research outputs and technologies have had slow uptake by the general public. And these research outputs and innovations often ended up on shelves instead of being uptaken by the end users. And the reason for this was really simple. The end user, the human, had been left out of the innovation process. Next slide, please. Yes, so in 2019, a new way of thinking was introduced by researchers from Michigan State University who visited the university and specifically the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. And the new way involved having humans at the center of everything, basically at the center of innovations for research, for training and outreach. And those three, research, training, and outreach, are the mandate of the university. So the new method was introduced through the Innovation Scholars Program, or CAES ISP, proceeded with the generation of the college-wide level design team, representing all the departments from all the schools within the college. And the design team then generated the grand challenges, and out of the grand challenges, we put up a call for proposals. In the end, there were 9 scholar teams that were generated and identified through a competitive process. And this really formed the very first cohort of scholars at the university. It's been running now for 2 years. And since it started, there have been a number of requests for information and inquiries on when the next cohort of scholars will actually be selected. And you would wonder why. The reason is simple. Right from the very start, members within the college realized and acknowledged that this was a program like no other. Colleagues in the college have now appreciated what the ISP can do and how it has changed the way of thinking and changed the way of doing things. The ISP helped to put the humans or the end user at their center. Next slide, please. Yes, so an example is Professor Janina Karungi, who is a scholar, on the ISP. She's an entomologist who has special interest in the horticultural subsector. Her concern was the widespread incidence of pests, specifically in hot pepper and tomatoes, that was perpetuated by a poor seed system and the rampant use of chemicals to control those pests, to the extent that a lot of the hot pepper exports actually got rejected due to chemical residues on them. And this problem had been persistent for quite a while. With her involvement in the ISP, Professor Karungi acknowledged that the solutions to the persistent problems in the hot pepper subsector actually resided with the population, with the humans. So she employed the HEGES-The approach to engage stakeholders in the hot pepper subsector, drawing them from all the hot pepper growing regions within the country. And in those slides, you will see some of the engagements that were taking place. Next slide, please. So the stakeholders included a wide spectrum from input dealers to farmers, policy makers, researchers, traders, transporters, name them. And she had several consultation workshops where there was a free interaction and the exchange of ideas. And through this process, solutions were identified, and the same stakeholders were established as the ambassadors that were required to bring about the desired change in the subsector. And her team currently is influencing policy for a vibrant horticultural subsector in general for the country. Next slide, please. And another example of human-centered design approach at work is that of Professor Goretti that you see in the slide there. She's the leader of the top management track team of the ISP with concerns on how best to reinvigorate the innovation culture within CAES. Her team identified stakeholders in the teaching and innovation space, and then went ahead and identified the major stakeholders or major people that she could engage with, and then had them in a series of brainstorming sessions to identify the challenge, but also to prioritize the solution avenues for those challenges, with a view that the solution challenge avenues would lead her to what is actually needed to revigorate the innovation culture. And also, upon taking up the mantle of full college leadership as the new principal, the very first activity that Professor Nabanoga performed was to seek audience with the people, the humans, so that she might better understand them, better understand those people who are at the center of any innovations, that she will be credited college principal. That what she did is actually human-centered design thinking at work. Well, that is our story at Kayesa SP. I wish to hand over back to you, Kurt, to take us through the next segment of that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Hi, my name is Kurt Richter. As John says, I'm the director for the Global Center for Food Systems Innovation, and it has been my pleasure to work with John Bunnell and the other members of presenting today since 2016 on the Innovation Scholars Program. Next slide, please. What we've been trying to do is work on how do you create a culture of innovation at an institution of higher education. Our experience at Michigan State University has said that, it is not sufficient to just buy new equipment. It's not sufficient to just train individuals at institutions like Michigan State University or in conference rooms and hotels. There needed to be something more. And so what we set out to do is how do we build the necessary combination of people, organizations, and networks to have sufficient energy to create a culture of innovation at institutions of higher education. Next slide, please. And the way we think about this is there's 4 things that need to be to make them necessary. Proximity. People closest to the problem are best suited to solve the problem. Local context, local knowledge is important. There has to be a purpose. Small ideas, small innovation has to be connected to larger global challenges. We challenge our scholars and administrators to think globally, but act locally in very real ways. The third thing is practice. People need a safe space to practice being innovative. How do you take small risks to get big rewards outside of your normal process of recruitment, retention, promotion, so they can learn in a safe environment and bring that into work? And finally, place. Luinar, Must, and Macareri are all creating places where innovation is nurtured, innovation process is championed, and there's a place where people who have interesting ideas can go and get help. So our model, the Innovation Scholars Program, is basically 3 things. It's teachable, it's repeatable, and it's scalable because of the connection that the Vice Chancellor Manuel Kaunda mentioned. ISP 1 is working in ISP 2, ISP 1 and 2 are working in ISP 3. That connection of our program graduates to future implementations has converted our program from being a 1-year, one-off program to becoming part of the language and modes of operation and understanding in institutions of higher education where we worked. Next slide, please. But the center of our program is this idea about the power of the individual, about how people inside of institutions can lead to systems change if they find new ways of doing things and if they find opportunity in places they used to find challenges. Next slide, please. And so we focus on training individual scholars and individual administrators in the same space at the same time. As scholars find problems, we task the solution of those problems to the people that control the systems they work in inside the organizations, from financial challenges to retention challenges to property rights challenges. And as a university begins to be able to engage differently with the private sector, with their students, with their faculty, they take on a different role inside the system. In our model, the individual, when trained inside the system, inside the organization, can lead to institutional change, and that leads to positive change at the system level. Now, I want to turn it over to my colleague, John Bunnell, to talk more about some of the theoretical principles behind our program. John?
Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, this is what I'd like to share with you regarding the theoretical framework and the components of the program. Next slide, please. And then we will move into our questions and answer discussion. The Innovation Scholars Program has a theoretical framework that pulls from a number of fields to address organizational challenges at universities from multiple angles. So you've heard already, it's based in adult and experiential learning applied to professional development and training. The ISP framework also pulls on systems thinking, specifically applied to African higher education institutional systems. As you've heard, it pulls on human-centered design as a problem-solving methodology applied to academic roles in our host universities. And we have found one framework that holds all this together nicely is comes from the field of organizational theory. It's Bowman and Deal's 4 frames model that's been around for several decades and proved quite useful. We use this with faculty and institutional leaders to help them see their work and their challenges from different lenses within the university in order to create and identify levers of change that will help solve problems within their own universities and tap opportunities to then have greater mission, teaching, and outreach outcomes. Next slide, please. The Innovation Scholars Program has several core components. You've heard already about the broader impacts and the stories of institutional change. Here are the nuts and bolts. There are customizable program components that experience the faculty and institutional leaders experience. All of the components center around grand challenges that are co-created with the host universities at the very beginning of the program to ensure that the goals of the program align with the university's mission, objectives, and importantly, strategic plans. Through a competitive process, faculty and leaders apply to an 18-month or 24-month faculty fellowship program where they receive innovation grants to produce and support their innovations. They lead diverse design teams with expertise within and especially from beyond the university, as Jackie and others were talking about the value of end users. Then the participants experience human-centered design training as a shared methodology to complement, not compete, but complement with disciplinary training and expertise. Interactive workshops come alongside to complement the specific teams toward their grand challenges, such as communicating science to diverse audiences, or teaching and learning, or how to strengthen professional networks. ISP also utilizes regional excursions to other nearby innovation systems where the participants can see and observe innovation ecosystem actors working in one location and then adapt that learning to their own universities for the success of their own innovations. And a closing symposium is what wraps up this program with innovation awards, and where scholars present their prototypes they have tested to external stakeholders and potentially other funders for further investment to sustain those individual innovations and ideally the program itself at the university. Next slide, please. The Innovation Scholars Program uses a learning-informed mechanism for its monitoring and evaluation for continued program improvement. The program strives not only to teach, but also model human-centered design. So speaking continually and engaging with the participants for continuous improvement to ensure that the program itself is adapted along the way. In this process, individual coaches play a really critical role. They assess scholar learning, They facilitate accountability and mostly encourage scholars in the application of HCD to their individual projects. And so those coaches play a key role and serve as an interface between the scholars and also the program leaders and management in this monitoring and evaluation. So I just wanted to point out as well, in the Higher Ed Summit, there are actually several other poster presentations, lightning talks, and panels about the Innovation Scholars Program. 2 of them happened yesterday. One lightning talk featured the monitoring and evaluation system of the ISP. And there was another one that featured a presentation on the coaching model of the Innovation Scholars Program. So we can drop links of the agenda and look at that. We would encourage you to go back and look at those and also the upcoming ones even today. So next slide, please. To wrap up, this is a summary of the competencies that the Innovation Scholars Program builds throughout the fellowship program. As scholars lead design teams and as a cohort together, they embrace thinking at systems level to deconstruct problems with stakeholders and then engage and grow networks to develop solutions with users, whether those users are students or farmers, dairy producers, or COVID patients. The program creates formal and informal opportunities to learn communication skills and practice communicating the meaning and value of their scientific innovations to diverse audiences. And together, as the MSU team commits to an HCD approach, MSU works with the leadership of the host institutions so that the capacities of both institutions are mutually strengthened for project management, continuous improvement, and monitoring and evaluation. And so with that, we would invite you to drop any other questions in the chat. I would also like to turn it over to Kurt to lead us in our time of panel discussion and question and answers.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. To our colleagues in Malawi and Uganda, great presentations. I wish we had all day to hear more stories from you, but we don't. So any questions from folks? So there's a question from Bill Heinrich in the chat. To the institutional leaders, what themes or similarities do you see across the 3 programs? So Emmanuel and David, you guys were involved in the very first ISP. Can you take a shot at that answer?
Yeah, I can start and David can come in. But what we see as a similar in all these universities are the same challenges that universities and industry, in most cases, they don't speak to each other. In other words, the talk between partners, industry and universities is a bit limited. In the end, it affects the whole innovation process at universities. I see that as one key issue. The other similarity which I see is that each one of university would want to see that it grows, the evaluation ecosystem. So how can we make our scientists inclined to do more innovation? How can we make our students to think innovatively? These issues are cutting across all the institutions which leaders, as institutional leaders, were facing. And I think we have common similarities, common challenges that we're trying to tackle together. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Okay, I have another question here from Alan. Can you give us some more concrete examples of the innovations that came from this process? David?
Yeah, I could start on that one. So the first innovation was to do with automatic water dispenser made by a community innovator. We had also an innovation on COVID tracking system that was taken by the Minister of Health. We have now almost 3 e-health innovations. These are to track access to health facilities, but also to make sure that the health passport is online. We have also innovations now that are producing speakers. Actually, I should say we have maybe more than 30 innovations at different types of the value chain, some at prototype, some more is going into the incubation space, and some we are now discussing with the partners to uptake them. Thank you.
Thank you. And John has put a list in the chat of the innovations currently going on inside of Makerere. Jackie, you have any comment on those innovations? Anything that pops to mind that's special about them or you want to highlight?
Yes, thank you. I can talk about two, specifically the one on fruit processing. There was a team that first went out to find out what was the reason why for instance, the School of Food Technology was generating some of these technologies, and they were not being taken up by the people that needed them, specifically on food processing. And then, so what the team did was to actually invite those would-be users of those technologies into the hub. And the stakeholders informed the designers what exactly they needed to see, so that they actually take it up and that it is less wasteful. Same thing also with the thresher. There was already threshers. This is basically corn threshers out on the market, but then very few people were taking them up. But most importantly, they were not very adaptable to situations where, for instance, there is no electricity. So the team sat down and thought about the best way to have a thresher that is using a pedal, because then it will be more adaptable to situations where there is even no electricity. So some of these would not have come up if the team had not gone to the end user to ask them what exactly they needed. Yeah, thank you.
Just to add that for Luana, we see more on innovation in the processes of how organizations, institutional pillars are coming up. For example, in the design of the incubation hub, the whole design is actually an innovation process. I think this is key for institutions to change. We are also seeing another center coming up in terms of the design of a center of excellence in commercialization. That innovation is systemic innovation is very crucial. We're seeing how a program has evolved in terms of having a new program. All of a sudden, it's called agricultural innovation. And the whole design itself is actually following the whole design, innovation design center. So innovation, not necessarily in terms of technologies, but actually of processes.
Right. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. One link I heard in all three of the responses from our colleagues is the program does produce some great innovations that work at the local scale. But one thing that we're most proud of is the process these institutions begin to champion that can lead not only to these innovations, but also to future innovations. One mantra of the ISP is innovation is not a product, it's a process. And that's something that we really stress early and often. So we have another question here from Betsanne Smith about one of the challenges is how to right-size the problems groups select to work on. Any insight from that? And I think that probably is best answered by people who've been in the program before. So back to our partners in Uganda and Malawi, any response to that? John, feel free to jump in if you have an idea about how to answer that or example for that.
Thank you, Kate. Maybe I can start.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, when we are putting up an innovation grant challenge, we have specific areas that we want our innovators to apply. And when coming up with these specific areas, we normally consult the ministries, the private sector, but also the communities. So when they've applied, then we have also a selection criteria that was developed together with the partners. And then that criteria has clear points or scores that we use to identify an innovation. And most of those scores, they're linked to either gender, environment, job creation, youth engagement. So those variables are in that selection criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other responses? John, can I get you to talk a little bit about the design teams and how those are used to sort of right size the problems?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Thanks for your question, Betsan. At the beginning of this process, the individual scholars recruit design team members. And part of the human-centered design process is to go through we use what's been popularized by the Stanford D School, a 5-step process, beginning with building empathy, and then problem definition, and then ideation, leads into prototypes and testing. And so in that problem definition stage, exactly one of the key priorities of that stage is to ensure that the problem has a focus, and that it's also feasible within the life cycle of this particular fellowship. So there's a combination of learning the process, but also applying it to a solution that is, like you said, Betsan, right-sized enough that they can actually work through that full design sequence in the span of this, 18 or 24-month program. So it's I would welcome other comments too from audience members. That's a critical piece of this, is to figure out, especially when we're talking about things like organizational change, what pieces of that can be selected to define the scope that's feasible in the program cycle. And as you can hear, many of these are continued beyond the program cycle. And I just wanted to point out, circling back to some of the other specific innovations David was just referencing at MUST and also at Luminar. There are 2 of their innovation hubs have actually received additional funding after the Innovation Scholars Program for continued work to run their own innovation processes. And also there are a number of the individual projects that have been funded and received other funding. For example, there's a case study that we'll link to in one of the resources that identified 2 COVID-related innovations that MUST scholars generated. So again, these are ways that it relates together, because during the process of the Innovation Scholars Program, certain funds and teams addressed part of a problem, and then that allowed them to get enough traction to get ideas that were then scalable for future additional funding. Back to you, Kurt.
Thank you. I was wondering if there's any questions from the audience. Have we said anything recently you just want to raise your hand and ask a question? Actually interact a little bit. That would be novel, innovative, if I can use that word. So, all right. Nora, did you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Nora.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. It's wonderful conversation. I learned a whole lot about the innovation and research with the universities. I actually attend the Laser Pulse Leadership in Higher Education Institutions in 16 African countries, and I follow them. So my question is, has any of the universities in these innovative processes, did they develop any product, process, or any service that was marketed, something that was marketed in revenue generated? I mean, at the end of the day, this is what the whole idea is, that universities become sustainable and produce these things with private sector, obviously, help of private sector. If any of the universities have produced in the past any services that generated them revenues. Thank you so much.
Right, thank you. I will ask David and Manuel and Jackie to respond to that.
Thank you, Kate. For the MUST Innovation Scholar Program, we've not yet marketed most of our innovations. We have one that is more or less at incubation space, and we are now waiting for the private sector to uptake that innovation. But as indicated, the COVID-19 tracking system, that process or that system was taken up by the government of Malawi. And as a government, we more or less donated the innovation to the government because we are also a public entity. But now at MUST, we are putting up the whole value chain of commercializing the innovation system. And not only the value chain, but we are also going to put up an innovation and business leadership academy. This is the one that will link to the private sector, but also have an income generating phase for our innovations. the policy currently does not allow the university to go into any private engagement or creating a commercial entity. So we are trying to change that policy so that we can also have a holding company. Thank you.
Any other responses from our other colleagues?
Yes, so for Luanda, for example, the whole idea is that since Africa, the major challenge is the bulging of the youth population, and governments are setting into the challenges of employment of the youth. And this is a big topic on government agenda. And the whole of strategy for Malawi, for example, is youth-centric. It's all towards youth. So the only thing we could do was, okay, to remain relevant, but also to ensure that our youth have got entrepreneurial skills. And that's why through this process, we did set up this incubation hub. Like I said, we've now channeled through 300 plus young people who are now, some of them having their startups, which would translate into business ventures. So although we haven't marketed our product as such, but most of the products which the youth are actually pursuing actually have got market value and are going to be into this space. The only thing we would do is to ensure that as Luana, we've got a stake in those, since we have trained them up, we have trained them, and ISP has helped us. So in the end, it becomes a sustainable mode that we can support more scholars through that engagement. So in the process of developing that, and and working forward, and with the new center that we've just created, that actually prospect. So you can imagine one step lead to the other. The new center, we're going to set up a whole architectural lab and a technical incubation as well, which can churn out products that are going to be marketed. So we're in the process of developing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. I believe we have one more question. As we wait for that question to come in, I want to direct everybody's attention to the links that are in the chat. This is links to resources on the Innovation Scholars Program they put together to give you some more background information. And if you have any questions for us directly, please feel free to email any of the panelists, and we'll be happy to fill you in with additional information. I'll go ahead and put my email address into the chat and invite my fellow presenters to do the same. All right, any final questions for us? Can you comment on what are some of the key aspects that make this partnership across countries and continents, and even better within countries, to work better? Wow, that's a good question. I'll ask one of our partners to quickly answer that. We've got a couple minutes. Vice Chancellor, what comes to mind to you? Or David, I see you turned on. David, go ahead.
No, I think let's start with the Vice Chancellor, then I can come in. Thank you.
Okay.
David,
Vice
start, David.
All right, David, you've got the floor.
I can start. So for Malawi case, I was involved in designing of the Luana ISP program. So the experience that I got from the Luana is the same platform that we used at MAST. And again, at MAST, the Luana people, they are the ones that supported us. So it has our personal relationships resulted into institutional capacity development relationships. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think Malawi is a young country, and the government has got one pillar. And that pillar has got Luana as more or less an institution leading pillar 1, and then MAST is leading pillar 2. So whenever we are being engaged by the government, we are always around the same table. So right. Again, I think proximity is one of the issues that has made us to be success. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Vice Chancellor, real quick, you got a few seconds?
Yeah, sure. Actually, a partnership is about people. So one thing that is very outstanding here is that the team that from MSU, they actually practice the HCD. That has been very important. And the HCD allows for adjustments of programs, adjustments of the way you deliver things, going forward, learning. It's a whole learning process. And I think that has the one that has kept our partnership going. And I can assure that in addition to ISP program, we've ended up having other different programs within with MSU, with MAST, because we've just gelled up together because of the human-centered design. It's about human being. It's about finding out empathy. It's about ideating together. It's about testing things. So key partnership here is about people practicing the HCD, the human-centered design, which I think is a very key thing for partnership building.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. I'll speak for John. We're humbled by your response. So, all right, Jackie, she had to jump to another meeting, I believe. All right. With that, we want to thank you for listening to us today and participating in our program. And like I said, if you have any questions, there's additional resources in the chat and on the conference website. Anybody on this team is happy to answer any additional questions you have. With that, I want to thank you and thank my panelists for a great program today. Have a good day.